Hello, everyone, and welcome back. My name is Sam Scove, and I'm the Army and Marine Corps reporter for Defense One. I'm excited to continue today's event with Major General Curtis Taylor, commander of the National Training Center at Fort Irwin, and Major General David Gardner, commander of the Joint Readiness Training Center at Fort Johnson. Together, they lead the Army's two most realistic training centers in the United States. These centers are core to the Army's push to work through lessons learned from Ukraine and to also evaluate new technology by putting in the hands of units. Gentlemen, thank you for being here, and I will leap right into the news of the day, which is Project Convergence, which is currently ongoing at the National Training Center. General Taylor, if you could kind of give us the background of how NTC is contributing to that and a little bit about what you're seeing from it so far, if you can share any of those details.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I really appreciate you having us on here today. And as you said, Project Convergence Capstone is going on this morning at the National Training Center. We've got about 2,000 soldiers out here from all across the Army that are conducting a series of use case experimentation exercises to test and experiment with emerging technology in the context of a tactical fight. And so we bring units out here. We give them a tactical task, and then we have them perform that task with a variety of new systems and see how well they perform. I really want to leave it to the Joint Modernization Command and Army Futures Command to talk about what they're learning, but it's been an honor for us to host it. There's a couple of reasons why I think Fort Irwin is uniquely postured to host this kind of experimentation. And it goes back to our founding. The National Training Center, or the idea of a desert training center, was created right before World War II. It was a great letter between General Patton and General Marshall in the 1930s, where he said, hey, if we build a training center out in Southern California in the Mojave Desert, and we bring soldiers out here in preparation for this war that we all think may happen in Europe or in the Pacific, if they can perform here, then they'll be able to perform no matter where this war takes us. And so that was the logic behind Patton's Desert Training Center, which evolved then over time and then was subsequently moved further north and became the National Training Center. And so as we look at a place, where do you want to go to experiment? The harsh desert, the harsh weather. I mean, we've got 30-knot winds going on right now here at the NTC, so that's affecting our small UAVs. We have harsh conditions, rough terrain. This is exactly where we need to be testing and validating the systems that we're going to be giving the soldiers on the future battlefield. So we're honored to be a part of it. And we really get a lot out of watching soldiers try to perform tactical, try to win with this technology. And so we're happy to be a part of it. And I think the Army's going to learn an awful lot from this experimentation.
Yeah, we're already seeing tons coming out from Project Convergence in terms of what Army leaders are saying in terms of the speed of targeting, things like that. And just to sort of open up the conversation a little bit more broadly, I know you both are very focused on learning lessons from modern war, from Ukraine in particular. So I was wondering, for both of you, what are the top one or two lessons you're taking away from Ukraine? And maybe more importantly, how are you incorporating those lessons into training?
Well, I'll go ahead and start, Sam, if that's okay. So we're watching, obviously what's going on in Ukraine right now, but we're frankly also watching other conflicts. Unfortunately, in the world, there's plenty of conflicts for us to see, both what high-end forces are doing at the peer, the near peer level, the criminal element, the special purpose forces, mercenary forces. And so really what we're seeing is, I'd say, a few things. Number one, maneuver still matters, right? We still have to have the ability to maneuver as a force, whether frankly in the offense or the defense. Number two, sustainment still matters, and it's incredibly difficult to do in large-scale combat operations, particularly on the offense, but also on the defense. And one of the things that makes it incredibly hard is really the third thing, which is the transparency of the modern battlefield. Everything that is on the battlefield can be seen, and it can be seen, frankly, not just by peer competitors, but people with access to innovation and commercial accounts. There's plenty of technology that's out there. And then, of course, we're starting to see the emergence of maneuver that includes unmanned systems, and I won't just say aerial systems, but unmanned systems more broadly. And so everything we do here tries to not only focus on the tasks that we think the Army, and in our case, brigade combat teams and other types of rotational units need to focus on, but also give them the taste of doing it under those kinds of conditions. And I know, I've stolen probably some similar ones that General Taylor will say, but I'll turn it over to him.
Yeah, I think, Dave and I are really closely aligned on this one. The number one change for us that we saw it in Nagorno-Karabakh, and then we saw it in the Ukraine. We're now seeing it in Gaza, as we watch these conflicts, is the transparent battlefield. The reality now is you could be seen and detected at distance. You could answer strategic, or you could answer tactical priority information requirements, simple questions like how many tanks have crossed the bridge. You could answer that question at strategic distance. So you could be all the way on a different continent and provide real-time information to questions that are of life and death consequence to a company commander. And then you can detect your enemy in so many different means and spectrum. One of the most important of these is social media. So what we've adapted here at the National Training Center, both of our training centers for decades have had a large number of role players who, they reflect the civilian nature, the civilian complications of the battlefield. They come seeking, water and humanitarian assistance. What we've done with our civilian role players is we've given them all phones, and we've had them. They take pictures of any military activity that they see on the blue or the red side, and they post that on an internal social media network. And that over time creates this treasure trove of real-time tactical intelligence. And so, if you're anywhere near a populated area, that your location, your position, your activity is being shown to a global audience. And I think that's really important because that's the nature of the future warfare. We're also dramatically increasing the use of drones here at the National Training Center, and making sure we have a mechanism in the OPFOR to fuse all that information back to a fusion cell that then provides that data down to the tactical edge. The second area where we're seeing a lot of, where we've been making a lot of adaptation is increasing the volume, accuracy, and relevance of artillery in the fight. Most of it, I spent a lot of time in forward operating bases in Iraq and Afghanistan, got shot at with artillery at those, but never was an artillery strike an existential threat to my organization. That's a different mindset when you're dealing with hundreds and hundreds of artillery strikes. So typically in a normal rotation, the OPFOR will strike about 100 times a day, different locations throughout the brigade's footprint. Those strikes go all the way back to the brigade support area, where your logistics trains are. And so units have got to learn to be mobile, to be dispersed, and to be protected. And just building those skill sets is a key part of the adaptation we have.
That's a fascinating. And one thread I wanted to pull on particularly is that you both mentioned transparency. And there's a limited number of things you can do to adapt to that transparency. You can hide, you can disperse, you can have decoys. How are units as they transfer through your training centers adapting to that need to be aware of the transparency? And Major General Taylor, maybe you could go first, and then we'll go to Major General Gardner.
Yeah, so just for your listeners, I had the privilege to walk Sam through a core command post that we had here, that we have here, and it's set up now for Capstone that's hidden in an abandoned warehouse. And when you walk into this warehouse, it looks like an old dumpy government building that hasn't been occupied in 30 years, which is exactly what it was until we put the core command post inside. And what they've learned after being there for a couple rotations now is they've learned how to, what we call hide in plain sight. How do I make sure my my antennas, my satellites are set up in such a way that I can send and receive information, but I can do so with a footprint that is almost indetectable to those on the outside. How do I manage my personnel policy so when people can leave the building and come back into the building? Those kinds of things. We're learning how to do that. How do I operate a command post that might be hidden in an old abandoned warehouse? That's one great innovation that we're seeing. We're also seeing our command posts, and General Gardner's probably got a lot more on this than I do, but our command posts are getting a lot smaller. The last brigade that was just out here completely removed all the satellite connections, what we call the upper tactical internet connections that it had inside the brigade. So it no longer had a requirement to carry these, satellite dishes that are sometimes, 12 to 15 feet tall, very easy to detect with a UAV. And what we saw is once they were divested of that requirement, the command post shrunk dramatically. The mobility time increased, and then we're also seeing units learn how to disperse and keep separation. The goal here is slightly different in the woods of Louisiana, but you cannot hide in the desert. You can't be invisible, but you can look unimportant. So the goal here is not to necessarily disguise that there is a Army unit doing something at this particular location, but to disguise the purpose and intention of that. So if you have a good counterfire program and you've got a good way to respond when your enemy attacks you, then as long as you look unimportant, you could operate in some relative security that the enemy might not choose to strike your particular target because they don't know what you're doing. And so really making sure our command posts look like everything else on the battlefield is one of the key objectives here, in addition to being mobile and dispersed and protected.
And General Gardner, same question to you. How is that challenge of transparency translating into how units behave on the battlefield?
Yeah, so and again, very similar to General Taylor. I mean, we've got great relationship between the combat training centers. What I would offer is what our opposition force often says, which is it's a transparent battlefield, but the fundamentals of dispersion and camouflage still hold, because they, as the enemy, that's what our opposition forces are representing. They, as the enemy, also have to understand how to preserve their assets for when they need them according to their plan. And so the last thing they want to do is strike something, reveal their locations, and also succumb to counterfire. But what we have to understand is, one, how to disperse. And so what we've seen, for example, is our large supply centers, which we call the brigade support area. Those used to be very large singular location. We thought, frankly, it would take us a long time, maybe a couple of years, before we really started to see units disperse those effectively, because much like anything else, the more you decentralize, the more perhaps survivable you become, but it becomes a little bit more difficult to command and control it. Well, we've seen units within a 6-month period, those lessons spread throughout the Army, and to do that quite effectively. So how to disperse matters. The other thing is, what kind of camouflage do we need? And it's not just, in our case, foliage, which helps because you don't want to necessarily reveal everything to overhead imagery, which is not just militarily available, but commercially available. You've got to be cognizant of your electromagnetic signature. And so what we've seen is our units get much more mindful of their electromagnetic signal, to start to be more disciplined about how much they transmit and when they transmit. And they're also very cognizant, and our newer systems are what we call transport agnostic, so that perhaps you can't detect a signal and immediately identify that with military purpose. And we've become a lot more proficient at being able to do those things, so that, one, a little bit harder to find. If you do find us, a little bit harder to determine with certainty what we are. And then the last element is, while you're trying to decide that element of certainty, you better be able to move quickly. And so what we've seen is not only our command posts get smaller, but much like the sound barrier, I would tell you, when I was involved with training from 2018 to 2020, the sound barrier was about 30 minutes. Really, even your best places, it was really hard to get under the 30-minute mark. And now we are seeing people in the single digit in terms of their ability to break down and move to someplace else, so that, we're not there when they do try to hit us.
And General Gardner, is that a matter of reps and sets? Simply units are getting better at taking stuff down, or are there technological fixes that are part of that, using low Earth satellites, smaller, communication stations? How do you describe the difference between those two very different setup and construction times?
Yeah, I think there's probably a few things. The first thing is equipment, right? We're getting better in the equipment that we are fielding. We're listening to the needs of the units more as an Army, to see what works and to quickly divest of what doesn't work. The second thing is, yes, I do believe people are getting more, as you called it, reps and sets, essentially more opportunities to train that and do that. I think the third aspect, though, which is a form of rep and set, but we're starting to finally see what we call generational learning come to fruition, right? So people are returning to the combat training centers, and they've been now focused on these types of missions for a number of years, right? And so they're continuing to learn as individuals, not just as organizations, from previous experiences. And that puts a memory bank, so to speak, in their heads where they can now apply more to similar situations. And then the last thing, frankly, that I've really been impressed with is our ability to share between organizations, not even necessarily at the same installation, but across similar type units across the Army, where they are really talking to each other and they're really going to share their lessons. And we also see a lot more folks come to the Combat Training Center to observe for short periods of time voluntarily as a unit, individuals, leaders, and then go back and try to train those things that they're observing when they come to the Combat Training Center.
That's fascinating. And the other thing I've sort of been wondering about here is there's so many challenging lessons to learn. Where do you see units struggling to incorporate these lessons? Like, they may know they need to turn off their cell phones or not take their cell phones, but perhaps they are. Where do units sort of struggle to improve over time?
I'll tell you the biggest challenges that we see, and what we, if you were coming to the NTC in 6 months and you were saying, hey, what do I need to do to prepare? What I would offer to you is a phrase that we use here: toxin trains. So the direct fire fight between two infantry formations or armor formations, we've got a pretty good training model for that, and that tends to go fairly well. And I'm very confident in our military's ability to go toe to toe with any other nation in the world, kind of mano on mano or tank on tank. It is the command post systems and our sustainment systems that require the greatest training, and you would expect that. The combat training centers were created because it's really difficult at home station to replicate the full breadth and complexity of a brigade operating, hundreds of miles away from its base of operations, with extended lines of communications that are competitive the whole way and over multiple, mountain ridges, trying to communicate. And so the struggle for units is getting those command posts right. And the key, what great units do, is they develop a clear vision of what they want that command post to do. We've got some doctrine that kind of helps them understand how to do that. They incorporate their tools. They train their soldiers on what everyone's role is. And the best command posts treat their command posts like the con of a submarine, where everyone has a duty. We empower down to the lowest possible level. So, we've got young soldiers and especially great sergeants who have critical roles to play in the command post. They've been trained on those roles. They understand how to do those things. They've got really good tactical standard operating procedures that are codified in a document. And then they, that's what they come in with. If they build those skill sets at home station and they build good command and control, that makes a huge difference on the rest of the formation. And that's why the Chief Staff of the Army has been laser focused on building a resilient, robust, mobile network that can make those command posts more agile and more effective at the same time. The second piece, like I said, the trains. Understanding sustainment over distance is really, really hard. I mean, keeping a tank brigade resupplied over a continuous attack of about 120 to 150 kilometers is about what we'll do over the course of 9 days of force on force. That's roughly the same distance from the Belarusian border to the city of Kyiv. And we saw how much the Russians struggled in the sustainment aspects. They couldn't sustain their formations over distance. That's really hard work. We see that all the time here. So it's not uncommon for tanks to run out of fuel out here. It's not uncommon for combat power to diminish because we're waiting on repair parts and spares to be moved forward after 3 or 4 days of fighting. And so really building those systems, that's the real PhD level of getting a sustainment and a command and control architecture that enables those great young infantrymen and tankers who are out on the forward edge.
And there's an interesting point here and another thread I wanted to pull on, which is the sustainment and logistics. So during the global war on terror, logistics was obviously a challenge, but you had relatively safe logistic bases that you could issue equipment from, maintenance, all of that. That's obviously not going to be quite as true in a contested environment, in any, full war with China or Russia or any power with those capabilities. And I know both of you have been bringing more of those logistics and sustainment aspects into training at both centers. General Gardner, maybe you could talk us through some of the things you're doing in that sense, and then General Taylor, if you could follow up, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think, I'll take, if it's okay, Sam, just a little different angle on your point. And General Taylor mentioned some of this or alluded to it. It's not so much the supply side that's really difficult. It's what we call the distribution side of this, right? And so, let me just take something as simple as water. I mean, if you decide that for every day in this environment, every soldier needs to have, I'll just say 4 quarts, an even gallon, just to keep my math easy, right? So they can do that. So each soldier can carry and consume 1 gallon, and my company has 400 gallons extra, which is good. And now I've got other water at my combat trains, as we call it. So that's a little bit further back. And then I've got one more place that has large. So we're talking thousands of gallons of water. Well, we understand then that every day we consume that gallon as a soldier. And so a brigade has 4,000 soldiers. And so how do I move, let's say over a 30-kilometer distance, the thousands of gallons of water to those soldiers that, by the way, and this is the rub, can only carry 1 gallon a day? That's the real difference. You're going from an environment where you could literally consume whatever commodity at an unconstrained level of consumption. And now, not only do you have a level of consumption, you have a constrained ability at each echelon to deliver that. And by the way, from the United States, we're pushing those same supplies to some higher element, which is ultimately giving it to the division, to the brigade, all the way down to that soldier. Now figure out that math problem of how you have to do that and how many assets you have to move that water, multiply that by 10 other types of supply, and now put all of those operations where things are on the road or in the air delivering them at risk of destruction. And that's, I think, the challenge that the National Training Center and the Joint Readiness Training Center really bring home to logistics. That's really hard to do. It's not hard to understand, but it's really hard to do in contact, if that helps.
Yeah, General Taylor, would you like to add anything to the sort of logistics and sustainment element?
Yeah, and that was very well spoken. I would say the unique context of the National Training Centers, I would take exactly what Dave just said and replace water with fuel. While we do have water distribution, it is important, but those tanks, particularly our jet turbine engine Abrams tank, which is the best tank in the world, hands down, it takes a lot of gas. And so it's like exactly like he said, we will consistently see that the brigade will have ample fuel, but the distribution and fuel to the forward edge is the challenging thing in the distribution at the right time. Because nobody, we recently did a river crossing, and by the time the tanks finally made their way across the river, they were almost out of fuel. Well, the hardest thing to do once you get across the river is hold that position and protect your very tenuous bridge crossing from enemy counterattack. Well, now they had to get fuelers across those bridges to fuel up the tanks on the other side. That's exactly what General Gardner is talking about with the distribution challenges. I want to highlight, just to kind of step back, that what makes our Army unique, I would offer, is that we test and audit our brigades in this unforgiving crucible like no other training centers in the world. And so, between Dave and I, we probably touched or had direct contact with every training center for every ally and partner that we have. And one thing we're able to do, and we have a lot of allies here on the ground. I was just meeting with the commander of the Japanese training center called the Hokkaido Training Center. And what he was very impressed with, the way we were able to do things here, is that we could replicate the full breadth of the sustainment and command and control warfighting functions and really audit our leaders and our readiness against that unforgiving reality. And so that is what I think makes our Army unique. Again, going back to the Russians, they did these massive exercises in Belarus called Zapad, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, but they did not train with the realism that prepared them for the kind of complexity they were going to face when they got in a real fight. And what keeps me up at night every night is, are we imposing that accurate realism on the units that come through here so that they're prepared for it as they get into the next fight?
And are you seeing from unit commanders that they are getting better at logistics and those sustainment? And if so, is that more of a question of, again, reps and sets, familiarity, or are there technical ways to sort of make this better? Obviously, there's more digital ways to track fuel consumption and needs, things like that.
Well, I would say the CTCs are great at diffusing lessons learned, because any unit there at any given time, there's 10 or 12 units that are starting to focus more and more on their next CTC rotation. So they're very interested in what's going on, and we, just like General Gardner does, we welcome them out to ride along with our OPFOR. We welcome them out to ride with our OCs. We want them to see everything that we're doing. So when you change a variable at the National Training Center and you create an effect, it tends to diffuse through the force relatively quickly. And I would tell you that in the sustainment world, we're seeing a lot of progress. We're seeing, and some of it is old and some of it's new. A lot of it is returning to some of the really important disciplines we had during Desert Storm, where we conduct discipline logistics resupply twice a day for our armor formations, where we've got the right people and the right systems in place to track our logistics requirements. That has been changing very, very rapidly here. I'm pretty happy with that, as well as the diffusion, kind of the creative thinking that's going on in how we disperse command posts.
Mm. And I know another thing that's kind of changed is the ability for commanders to give detailed direction. Obviously, if you're being jammed or if the command post is hit, there's a much bigger emphasis on providing clear, easy to understand direction. And General Gardner, I know this sort of is something that we've talked about. What kind of, when it comes to the sort of time-honored challenges of leadership, what do commanders kind of need to relearn or even unlearn from how they operated in the global war on terror versus this new large-scale combat operations environment that we're training for now?
Yeah, Sam, I was going to commend you as being a learning individual. You were starting to read back from your visits here. No, I think you're exactly right. One of the things that we talk about here is complex and conceptual versus simple and detailed. And we would prefer that you have a simple plan with details, because we can execute that and that might work. So come up with a plan that might work. Keep it simple. We've heard that throughout warfare, but come up with details, because what I think the two biggest things that leaders learn here, number one, is they need to be more directive than perhaps they were used to in the counterinsurgency environment. And by that, I really mean the officers and non-commissioned officers who have that experience. And that's really currently our battalion commanders, our battalion command sergeants, majors that have that deep experience in really both now, training for large-scale combat with combat experience in a COIN environment. And when I say that driving through details, that directive guidance, I don't mean how, telling their subordinates how to do something, but really making sure they understand what, because that's what our mission command is based on in the U.S. Army and some of our allied armies. If you understand what has to be done, if we lose communication, if I can't talk to you all the time, if I can't get out to your position, you'll probably turn a pretty good solution to that problem. At the same time, the second thing we do wrestle with is the importance of communicating the details that have to be synchronized within a plan. We've got to make sure that we're all looking at the same set of graphics so that we have the same map. And from company all the way through the highest echelon, if you pick a particular piece of the area of operations, we all see the same thing in terms of our plan. And it's okay if you need to make adjustments, but you've got to get those adjustments to your higher headquarters, because you may be adjusting how your company or your battalion is going to maneuver, which may have implications to your higher headquarters' ability to use artillery in support of that. And so the level of detail synchronization is probably something people wrestle with, and the necessity to give clear directive guidance for what must be accomplished.
And that's fascinating. General Taylor, is there anything that you would want to add to that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We just had a great test case in that with our last rotation. I said the last commander that came through here divested his formation as part of an Army experiment with the network of kind of upper TI, the internet that we're familiar with, where you can you get information off of Windows-based platforms, and he operated purely on the systems that were mounted on his vehicles. And so the first thing he lost was the ability to easily disseminate written products in detailed orders and multi-page with PowerPoint attachment kind of orders. So it was fascinating to watch the organization learn economy of language, and the reason we have doctrinal precision, the reason that the word clear means is different from the word attack, and those have subtle nuances in our language. And seize and secure are two very different words. So we can use precision in our language, so that we communicate very precise concepts in very simple ways. And so in a data constrained environment, we have to be very economical in the words we use. We have to move from kind of these long orders that included multiple annexes and a lot of things that are just kind of standard operating procedures, and focus on fighting products that give us the synchronization that we need. We've also spent a lot of time here talking about mission command, and mission command is the Army's philosophy of command and control. It's derived from the German concept of Auftragstaktik, and it operates on the idea that exactly what General Gardner just said very eloquently is, I want to tell you what to accomplish, not how to accomplish things. And the kind of the rheostat on how much mission command you can apply to your formation is a function, yes, of the experience and talent of your subordinates. That's important. It's also a function of the nature of the mission. And so commanders sometimes lose sight of how to manage that. And so, for example, when I was a battalion commander in Afghanistan, I gave relatively broad guidance to my company commanders. I gave them an area of operation. I told them to conduct activities in that area and then report to me on enemy activity. I probably needed to adjust that guidance on a weekly, maybe a bi-monthly basis. If I took those same commanders and I tried to execute a deliberate breach with them, and I wanted to synchronize my support by fire, my breaching force, and my artillery, just as General Gardner said, then I've got to have a much more detailed set of instructions, not because I trust them less, but because I have a much higher need for synchronization. And so we spend a lot of time with the battalion commanders talking through how do I adjust my rheostat based on my need for synchronization versus my need for initiative, based on the experience of my subordinates, or the relative inexperience if I've got new commanders. And so that is a very delicate system to work, especially in an environment where you might go hours or even days out of communication with commanders. So what we see all the time at the National Training Center, a brigade typically will begin with an attack, and that attack will come from a couple different locations. And in the first 3 days or so, a brigade might attack, let's say, 30 kilometers. And in the course of that 30-kilometer movement, there's a couple of intervening ridge lines that invariably present a risk to communication. So at some point, the attack is going very well until 2 or 3 battalion commanders are now on the far side of the ridge line, and the brigade commander's on the other side. And so he loses communication. Eventually, he goes forward. Now he can't communicate with his brigade command post. And just adapting to, how do I fight? How do I continue to synchronize in an environment where I may have only itinerant communication, is what mission command is all about. And that's why we spend so much time focused on it. But the Army's learned that very quickly, and they're adapting quickly.
That's fascinating. As we sort of wrap up this interview, I wanted to give you an opportunity both to to sort of give a shout out to your OPFOR and all the interesting things they're doing, and also maybe call out some of the ways that you are going to be changing these training centers in small ways over the next 6 months to a year. I know you've both have worked a lot on, introducing different types of things like fortifications at the NTC or increased use of artillery, things like that. So let's perhaps stay with you, General Taylor, first. If you could talk about some of the cool things the OPFOR, the opposing force, is doing, and how you'll be changing or tweaking NTC in the coming months.
Yeah, we're really excited where the OPFOR, this is the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment, known as the Black Horse. We're excited where Black Horse is going. They have really improved, the use of new technology like the drones and the EW capability that we've talked about. They've also really spent a lot of time thinking about how do we restore offensive tempo to a transparent battlefield. And I'll tell you, attacks are very, very hard on a transparent battlefield. We saw this in the Ukraine. We see a lot of stagnation, and nobody wants to enter the next war with Americans fighting trench warfare, month after month, the kind of slog we're seeing. So we've got to figure out how do we restore offensive tempo to a transparent battlefield. They have done that well, and I watched them do that on 11 February, Super Bowl Sunday, and they knew they were attacking into a defending brigade that had successfully dug 30 to 40 tank fighting positions in this valley. This was going to be a very, very difficult fight for them. And they knew they were facing incredible odds. What they were able to do, and I won't necessarily get to the outcome of the battle, it went, there was great training on both sides, I'll say that. But what the OPFOR did very well is they used every bit of satellite technology, social media. They had folks driving pickup trucks in civilian clothes, driving around, trying to get the information of where every tank was going to be during that, in preparation for that attack. Now, that's the first part. We could do that. We got lots of technology that can do that. But the most important thing that they did is through the night, they built this map board that had the detailed data on every tank's position, every fighting position. And then they developed a mechanism using their communications techniques to drive that all the way down to the tactical edge. And so the morning of the attack, I climbed up on the lead tank that was going to lead this attack into this, overwhelming capability that the U.S. unit had. And I asked to see the map board of that lead platoon leader, and he pulled it out. And sure enough, it was an exact match of the map board that I had just seen in the rear command post back at Fort Irwin. That, to me, is how we restore offensive tempo to a transparent battlefield. Is we've got to drive that information down to the tactical edge. And so, to the degree the OPFOR does that successfully, they are able to attack on a transparent battlefield, even in the face of overwhelming odds. And so that's probably training priority number one is learning how to do that and to do that at scale. And I was really proud of them for doing that. But they're getting very, very good at doing that. And then the other thing they were doing is they were using the drones to, as the U.S. unit would occupy dug-in fighting positions, they would fly drones over those positions and drop bomblets in there and use that to disrupt the enemy while they were also attacking. Still a terrifying thing to attack an Abrams tank that's dug in the desert, I'll tell you that. But they did well considering the odds. Where we're headed next is we're spending a lot of time really thinking through how we do live fire. We're increasing the volume of artillery that we fire. My goal is that every artilleryman gets the muscle failure during our live fire training because we recognize that if we're going to suppress enemy we do a breach during live fire. If we're going to suppress the enemy on the other side of something that looks like the Surovinkin line, we're going to use masses and masses and masses of artillery. So we're really upping the volume of our tank ammo expenditure as well. So we get our soldiers used to that high volume of fire. The other thing we're doing is we're in this unique location in Southern California where we're bringing together 3rd Fleet down in San Diego and the U.S. Air Force Air War Center in Nellis to combine exercises to make more joint capability rather than just inviting the Marines, the Army, and the Navy or the Air Force and the Navy to come to our exercises. We're figured out how to integrate those more effectively. We did that in the last rotation by tying together Red Flag and the division rotation we did here. We look forward to doing that more in the future.
That's that's going to be interesting to see what those results are. And General Gardner, if you want to sort of close on some of the things your Op 4 is doing and some of the changes you expect to see at your training center in the next 6 months to a year.
Yeah, and I think, General Taylor did a great job of talking about that. Again, our opposition forces are experts at the basics because they do it 10 or 11 times a year. So they are modeling good maneuver, and those soldiers don't spend careers in the opposition forces. They populate the rest of our Army as experts. They're at the cutting edge of unmanned aerial systems, employment of artillery, using electronic warfare, 3D printing, commercial technology, artificial intelligence. And what's important is they're sharing this by either bringing people here to fight with them or by having partnerships with emerging TTPs to help the Army learn. I mean, look, Sam, the unfortunate thing is that large-scale combat operations has an insatiable appetite for human life. And death and destruction is the greatest motivator towards learning. And we're seeing that in our conflicts around the globe. What General Taylor does at the National Training Center and what I do here is the closest we can safely approximate those conditions. And what I would tell you is I love what I'm seeing, because I'm seeing units that are making our opposition forces go to the next iteration, because they're learning what the Op 4 is doing, what the Op 4 is teaching them, they're adapting, and now my opposition force is having to develop tactics, techniques, and procedures to counter things that they developed or that they helped motivate development of. And as we see units, we're seeing them not get better from rotation to rotation. We're seeing them get better from day 4 to day 10, because again, they are motivated, because these combat training centers are crucibles, and they are the greatest combat replicator we have in the United States Army.
Well, I love to keep talking. It's been a fascinating conversation. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Major General Gardner, Major General Taylor, it has been an absolute pleasure talking with you both today. Thank you for joining us and sharing your insights. Up next, my colleague.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Up next, my colleague Lauren Williams will be talking with Major General Stanton, the commanding general for the Cyber Center of Excellence.